Hello creatives, welcome to another tutorial session by Simplified Arena. Well, today's class is not just going to be a class, it is going to be a master class. So in today's master class, we are going to be looking at an introduction to After Effects. By the end of this tutorial, you will have enough knowledge to complete an After Effects basic project. So what is Adobe After Effects? Adobe After Effects is a software used by motion graphic designers and VFX to produce stunning motion graphics and stunning VFX used in the movie industry, in the advertisement industry. Adobe After Effects is all over the place, everywhere, all at once. So without further ado, let's get started. So we will start by opening our Adobe After Effects. This is my Adobe After Effects here, right here on my desktop. So I'm just going to click on it and open it. So ladies, gentlemen, when Adobe After Effects opens, this is it looks like this. Right here, these are the previous projects I completed. I completed this one 22 hours ago. I completed this one 12 days ago, and so on and so forth. So we are just going to ignore this section. We will go straight to the point. We are going to create our new project. A project is like a workspace where we are going to be doing all the cool stuff in After Effects. So to create a new project, as you have already guessed, we click on this new project tab right here, tap, and there you go. This is our After Effects project. This is where the magic will be happening. This is where we will do all the cool stuff. Yay. So, well, this is just a project. I mean, it's not like there's anything much we can do here. I mean, just look at it. I mean, it's very confusing that we don't even know where to start. But that is why I am here to guide you. So, ladies, gentlemen, let's get started. So the first thing we are going to do will be to create a new composition. A composition in After Effects simply means that the workspace that we are going to be working in. So to create a new composition, you know, the Adobe programs, there are several ways to do the same thing. We can just click here on new composition. And then these are our composition settings. Here we choose our video resolution. The resolution is the dimension of the video. We can choose an HD resolution, like right here now it is on HDV. This is an HD resolution. We can choose a 4K resolution, like these are 4K resolutions here. We have a UHD 4K. These are 8K resolutions. There are just so many NTSC-DV, NTSC-DV widescreen, and so on and so forth. So we are going to choose our resolution. You know, I usually like working on the HD TV resolution. It's just an HD resolution. We are going to click OK, and there you have it, our new composition. If you see like this, don't worry, disable caps lock and you have your composition here. So we are going to delete this by just clicking on top of the composition and hitting the delete key on our keyboard. So now I will show you another method of creating the composition, but before that, let me just give you a brief introduction of the various, you know, the After Effects user's interface. It just looks so scary. It just looks, you know, you probably want to run away now, or you want to hit something. So I'm going to teach you the user's interface. So when you open After Effects, this is what you see. So this is your project panel. You use this panel, well, let's just say it's used to images, footage, and everything that we will be using to create our project. For example, you could hold pictures or images and so on. I'll be teaching you how to use it later on. This panel right here is called the composition monitor. Here you actually see your composition. For example, let's say if you draw a rectangle, you'll be able to see the rectangle there. Then here, this is called the miscellaneous panel. Properties like align, character, paragraph, tracker, content aware, and so on. Then right down here is our timeline. Let's just create our composition now, and I will explain the rest as we are progressing with our project. So to create another method to create a composition is we come to the composition here and we click new composition, or we use shortcut Control N, or we come right here on the project panel and we click on this composition icon right here, which says create new composition. I usually prefer using this method, so I'm just going to click on it. Here I'll be able to edit our composition. I usually will want 30 frames per second as my frame rate. I'm sorry, I'm in 30 not 90. 30 frames per second as my frame rate, because 30 frames per second is usually some form of the standard frame rate. And then here is the resolution. This resolution simply means the preview resolution on our composition monitor. Right here is the background color of the composition. So we are just going to click on OK. And there you have it. You see that if I right click and I go back to composition settings and I click on background color, I change it to red. I click OK. You see that the background color changes to red. But I will leave the background color to white and I will click on OK. So congratulations, you have created your first composition in After Effects. You see, it's not as confusing as everyone thought it would. So after that, creating our composition, we are going to dive straight into the toolbar. What is the toolbar? As the name suggests, it just means that it is a bar where tools are in After Effects. So this is the toolbar right up here. We have the various tools. We have the home. We have the hand tool. This hand tool is used to move our composition monitor. We have the zoom tool, but I don't use the zoom tool very often because I just to zoom in I just roll my middle mouse button, and to zoom out I roll my middle mouse button outward. And this hand tool, I can just use it to, after zooming in and out with my middle mouse, with my mouse scroll, I just grab the composition and I keep it at the center of my screen. Then we have orbit around sensor. We will not be covering that in this introduction course. We have pan under cursor tool, and we have dolly towards cursor tool. We will not be looking at that. Then we have the rotate tool. Rotation tool is used to rotate objects. To show you what the rotation tool do, I'm just going to create a rectangle, and then I select my rotation tool. You see that I can then rotate my rectangle like this. I mean, pretty cool, right? And then this here is the pan behind tool, or the anchor point. We use it to move the anchor point. So if I place an anchor point, is simply the area of an object in which the transformation will start taking place from. For example, rotation. Let's say our anchor point, this our anchor point here. Let's say our anchor point is in the center of this rectangle. We can send the anchor point to the center of the rectangle by holding Control on the keyboard and double clicking on the pan behind tool. And then if we select our rotate tool here and we rotate our rectangle, you discover that it is rotating from the center. Just going to select the pan behind tool and move the anchor point to this point here, and then to this point here, and then we take the rotation tool and we rotate our object. You discover that it is rotating from the anchor point. The same thing applies when using any of the transforms, whether scale, rotation, position, and whatever. The same applies. So that is the anchor point, that is the pan behind tool, and that is the rotation tool. We are going to look at the object tool. This tool is simply used to draw objects. I'm just going to select the rectangle and click delete on my keyboard. Like the first object within the object tool is a rectangle. I draw my rectangle there. Our rectangle has appeared on the timeline. So we are going to draw our next tool, which will be we just click on this drop down beside the rectangle. It's a rounded corner rectangle, and we draw our rounded corner rectangle. You discover that it also appears above the rectangle on the timeline. Then we can get back here. We can draw our circle. We can draw our polygon, and so on and so forth. I'm just going to delete all of those. So let's take the star tool. We draw our star. And then now let's talk about these properties up here. Here we simply have the fill and the stroke. And then now we have the stroke width. The stroke width is simply how thick or how big the stroke should be. The stroke can also be called the outline. So we change our outline color here. When we click on it, the color picker appears, and we can, let's use a blue outline. Then we click on OK. We can set our fill color here. Let me just shove it to the side. Let's give it a yellow fill, some form of yellow. And then when we are done, we click OK. So you discover that we have given our star a fill and a stroke, and then we can reduce the stroke width from it by just clicking on it and dragging down like that. And now we have created a yellow star with, is it some form of violet blue stroke? So now, normally when we want to change the color, we click on this fill color here, which will bring us to the color picker and we can pick a color. But now, let's say if we want to make a gradient fill, what we are going to do is, let me just shift this way. What we are going to do is we click on these fill options here. There's a difference between fill options and fill color. You should know that. We click on fill options. There are several options here. We have the solid color. Solid color simply means that one color. We have the linear gradient, which is a gradient as its name signifies. Then we have the radial gradient. So we select any of these are the blended modes here. We will not be getting into that now. We select a linear gradient and then we click on OK. After clicking on OK, if we now click on the fill color, we will be presented with a gradient to set. So we select this first color, which is white, and we come to the color picker here and we can set it to purple. And we select this second color, which is black, and we can set it to blue. So this will give you a purple and blue linear gradient. Then we can change it to a radial gradient right here by clicking on the radial gradient. Let's just keep it to be a linear gradient. So after we create our gradient, which is a purple and a blue gradient, you can see it looks very bizarre. It is a very bizarre looking gradient on our composition monitor here. To make the gradient look presentable, so we are just going to zoom in by using the mouse scroll and zoom in. Then we are going to use the hand tool right here to click and drag on our composition window to bring the star to the position of our liking. And then we go back to our selection tool. We can just use the shortcut V for that, and we can use the shortcut H for the hand tool. And we can also use the space bar for the hand tool. We just press the space bar, we grab our composition window and we just move it like that. So we are going to use V for our select tool. And then now we come here. You can see this little dot right here. Let me zoom in again. This little dot right here, we hover over it and we drag our gradient to look the way we want it to look. We can drag like that. I'm using the space bar to move my composition monitor around. Then we zoom out. We can zoom out with the mouse wheel. So that is my gradient. That is just a summary of how to use it. We can do the same for any tool. We can take the ellipse tool. We can draw an ellipse here. You discover that this is not a perfect circle. That is not a perfect circle. It looks like some form of an ovoid looking shape. So we can, to draw a perfect circle or a perfect square, we just select our ellipse tool. In this case, we can select the rectangle tool, but in this case, we will just select the ellipse tool like this. And then we draw our circle while holding Shift on the keyboard. You discover that the shapes are on the same layer. Like if I take this layer visibility here, I click that eye on and off, the shapes are on the same layer, but we don't want that. We want the shapes to appear on different layers. So I select my ellipse tool here. I draw like that. And to make sure that my next circle does not appear on the same layer with this sphere, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use V for my select tool. Then I'm going to unselect this layer here by just clicking on any random point on the timeline. I can click on that there, and then I can minimize this one by pressing this arrow here. Then I select my ellipse tool and I hold and draw the ellipse while holding the Shift key on the keyboard. It gives the perfect circle. And then now I can edit the gradient of this circle. I will just use my space bar to drag around. I can edit the gradient by clicking this point and moving the point way across like this, so that it gives you this reddish, this beautiful looking gradient. Then I can zoom out and in with my mouse scroll. So that is it about how you add the fill and the stroke to a shape. So I'm just going to delete all of this by clicking on them and pressing delete on the keyboard. Then now, the next tool we have here is the pen tool. This tool is used to make custom shapes. For example, you want to draw a flower and there's no flower tool here. So we select our pen tool and we draw our flower or a custom shape with the pen tool. So with the pen tool selected, I just click on our Canva or our workspace or on our composition monitor, and then I draw my flower. You can see that it is using the fill and the stroke color set up there. So I'm just going to click and drag to draw my flower. I just click and drag. I'm just clicking and dragging. Well, that is a very funny looking flower, but we will arrange it later. I'm just clicking and dragging, clicking and dragging, clicking and dragging. And then we merge the shapes here. So that is a very ugly looking flower. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not the best artist in the business. So that is our flower there. And then I can hover over this point and just arrange the gradient to look the way I want it to look. I can even put the diagonal like that. That's a cut across. I'm sorry about that. So that is our flower. There's no flower tool, but we have actually produced a flower. So yes, I said it's a very bizarre looking flower, so we are going to arrange it. So to arrange this flower, we select back our pen tool. We hover over these points here with our pen tool, and we can just click on the point. Then we can click and drag on this arrow to move the shape around. We can click and drag. We are trying to create a flower, so we just click and drag. Click and drag. You discover that as you click and drag, we are just clicking and moving around, dragging, and so on. So we just click and move around. But you discover that when I grab an arrow like this, you discover that both ends are moving. It distorts the shape here and also distorts the shape behind here. So to move just one of these arrows, we are going to hold the Alt key on the keyboard. We hover over the single arrow we want to move. We click on it and we drag. Discover that now I'm moving only one arrow at a time, which gives me greater control and flexibility to come out with a brilliant looking custom shape. If I want to move both arrows, I release the Alt key. So I'm just going to just release the Alt key, and now I move both arrows. And then now I hold the Alt key again, I move one arrow. I'm just going to make it to look like that. It's not the most perfect flower, but you get the sense out of what I'm saying. I'm just clicking and moving these points around. These points are called vertex points, by the way. That is one thing I forgot to mention. And we can delete a vertex point by going to the pen tool, clicking on this drop down arrow and clicking minus or delete vertex tool. Here we can just delete. We click on this tool here. We click on this vertex point there, delete it. Click on this one, delete it. Click on this one, delete it. So we are just going to undo that. And now you see our flower. It is our flower looking very beautiful, and so on. Then to add a vortex point, we go back to the pen tool and we take add vortex tool, and we can add a vortex point here. We go back to the pen tool and take delete vortex point. We can delete this one here. Then I'm just going to arrange the arrow. And I'm going to delete that one as well. That is just to demonstrate the function of the pen tool. So we are just going to quickly delete that. And the next tool we have is the type tool. As its name suggests, it is a tool used to type text. For example, we select the type tool, we click on our composition monitor, and we enter our text. The text is white, so you are not seeing it. This is A. And then we get back to our selection tool, or we can use shortcut V. And then now we will go to our miscellaneous panel here, and we select our character color. You know, the character is white, the composition is white too. The composition background color is white too. So we just click on characters here on our miscellaneous panel, and we select character color. We can select black. And now you can see our text, this is. And then we can hold Control and double click on the pan behind tool to set our anchor point to the center. And then we use V, or we can come here and click our selection tool. And you see it is the horizontal type tool. Then there's also the vertical type tool. That means, as its name suggests, it types vertically. So we come to our type tool and we select the vertical type tool. We click on it. We click on our composition monitor and we type the is. I'm sorry about that. The is L. You discover that the text types vertically here. We input our text vertically here, and with the horizontal type tool, we input our text horizontally. I'm just going to delete all of that again. So I think that those are all the tools we will be needing in this introductory course. The rest we will cover them in subsequent courses. So now I'm going to show you the different workspaces we have in After Effects. So if you come to our windows here on the menu bar, and we select workspace, you discover that these are the different types of workspace. If I want to select an After Effects workspace that is most suitable for animations, I select this one. You discover that the workspace has changed, and now this workspace is most suitable for animations. If I want to select a workspace most suitable for, let's say, maybe motion tracking, I select this one. It will be a workspace most suitable for motion tracking. If I want to select a workspace, but I usually work on the default workspace. Then, for example, if I were to mess up my workspace, for example, I undock my panels. To undock my panels, I click on the panel, and you click on this menu icon right here, and you choose undock panel. I undock my panel, and now I don't know what to do with it. And now I want to reset, or I can resize my various panels by going in between the panels and dragging up and down when this the mouse pointer changes. I can change like that. Now this workspace looks like a disaster. So to get back to a good workspace, I go to Windows and I select workspace, and I go to reset default to save layout, and I click on it, and my workspace has been resetted. So to import into After Effects, we can just double click on the project window, and then we can import anything from photos to any graphic element, videos, and so on. This was a brand reveal I did for this organization. So I'm just going to click import, and then Now to bring it to the timeline, I'm just going to drag it from this project panel to the timeline. And you see that it appears in the timeline. And I'm going to play it. That is how we import into After Effects. We can import images. I can select 2 images and I click on import. Then when we import these images, I can just select them, holding Control, and I bring them to the timeline. You discover that the images are not visible. That is because they are under the video layer. So I'm just going to drag them up and bring them above the layer. So now these are the images. And now I can select one at a time and then I move the image so that the image underneath is visible. Something like that. Alright, so that is how we import into After Effects. I'm just going to delete all of that. Well, I'm going to allow the video there. So the next thing we are going to learn how to do are the layer properties. Like these are the After Effects layers here beside the timeline. This is the layer, then these are the layers here. So we will be looking at layer properties. To explain layer properties, I will just insert a shape. So I'm going to delete this from the timeline by just selecting on it and clicking on delete. And I'll select a shape, a rectangle, and I'm going to draw it on our composition monitor. Then I'll change the fill to a solid color. And I will choose, let's go with a black color. And then the stroke, let's go with a red color. So to access layer properties, we simply select the layer. In this case, we select the shape layer using the selection tool with shortcut V, and we click on this drop down arrow right here. And then now we have content. This content just gives you the properties of the rectangle. So, okay, we click on this content, and then within the content, we can see the rectangle. This is it here. So we can click down on this drop down arrow, and then now we can see the stroke. We can see the rectangle part, which is the size, the position, the roundness. You can change the position by clicking on any of these position controls. We drag them, and we drag. We can move it horizontally and vertically by clicking like this. I'm just going to press Ctrl Z to undo that and Ctrl Z again. And this is the size of the rectangle. We can increase and reduce the size by clicking on this value and dragging up and down. And then this is the roundness. This parameter simply controls the roundness of the corners of the rectangle. If we click on these values here and drag them up, you see that the borders of the rectangle become rounded. And if we drag them down, they gradually become square again. So that is it for the rectangle part. And then now we go to the stroke. This stroke is simply the color of the outline of the rectangle with the color of the stroke. If we click on it here, you can also control the stroke color up here. So we can just click right here and the color picker will appear where we can select a color for our stroke. Let's go with a bright green color. We have changed the color of our stroke. Next, we go to opacity. Opacity is simply how transparent the shape should be. In this case, the rectangle, how transparent it should be on a scale of 1 to 100. So if we click on this value here and we drag down, we discover that the stroke becomes transparent, and if we take the opacity right down to 0, the stroke becomes completely invisible. And then as we click and gradually increase the opacity of the stroke, you discover that it becomes more visible. And at an opacity of 100, it is most visible. The next parameter here is the stroke width, which is simply the size of the stroke. Do we want it extremely big, or we want it, we just set the size we are comfortable with. And then the line cap here is for when we can convert this stroke into dashes. So to convert the stroke into dashes, we click on this add a dash or gap here, and it converts the stroke into dashes. Then we can increase the size of the dashes here by holding those values and dragging up. And then this offset is for animation. We have not gotten to that yet. And then now if you discover that if we come to this line cap and we change it to round cap, the edges of the dashed lines around. I think those are the essentials for the rectangle part. Then there are other options here like taper and wave. We'll be looking at that later in a more advanced tutorial. Then the fill is simply the fill color of the rectangle. Like when we click on this drop down arrow to expand the fill, we can see color here and opacity. As I said, opacity is simply how transparent the rectangle should be. The fill of the rectangle should be in this case. And the color is simply the color of the rectangle, of the fill color of the rectangle. Then the transform, I'll get to that immediately after this. So we can just minimize this content, and then now we go to transform. The anchor point, by the way, is this small dot at the center of the rectangle. So this anchor point here simply moves the rectangle without moving that anchor point. So if we click and drag like this, you discover that it moves the rectangle without actually affecting the anchor point. So we're just going to undo by pressing Ctrl Z on our keyboard. And then we go to the position. This position here is just the position of the rectangle or of anything we are working with on our Canva or on our composition monitor. So if we drag like this, you discover that we move horizontally, and if we drag this one, you discover that we move vertically. And then the scale is simply the size of our shape. So we can, if we hold and drag, you discover that we change the size of the shape. And note the rectangle scales in relation to this anchor point. So if we were to select the pan behind tool and move this anchor point to this point here, and then we come here and we scale this rectangle, it will scale in relation to where that anchor point is. Then the rotation is simply rotating our shape. So if we can rotate by just clicking and dragging on these values here, rotate 360 degrees and so on and so forth. We are just going to undo. The opacity is the transparency, or just how transparent the entire rectangle is. If we drag, hold those values and drag, you discover that. Yes, so that is it about the transform properties. Then after that, we are going to be looking at something very cool. We are going to be looking at keyframe animation in After Effects. Let's jump into that. So with our rectangle tool, we can set back our anchor point to the center by holding Ctrl and double clicking on the pan behind tool. And then now we can align our rectangle to the center of the Canva or to the center of the composition by selecting the rectangle with the select tool. You can use V as a shortcut. And then we go to this miscellaneous panel here. We select align. If you don't have align in your miscellaneous panel, you simply go to Windows and you select align from here. When you select align from here, it will appear on your miscellaneous panel. So I'll just click align from there, and I will align horizontally, and then I'll align vertically for our shape to get to the center of our composition monitor. So now animation. We will animate the position, the rotation, and the scale of this rectangle. So what we want to do is we want the rectangle to move from this point here out of the composition monitor into the composition monitor, stand at this center of the composition monitor, then scale up, and then scale down, and then move out. So what we are going to start by going to our composition. We go to composition settings, and maybe we want that animation to last for 15 seconds. So on the composition settings, here I'm going to set the duration of our composition. These first values here before the semicolon, they represent the milliseconds. I'm just going to set it to 0. This second value here represents the seconds. I will set it to 15. And this third value represents minutes. I will set it to 0. So I want this animation to last just 15 seconds. Then I will click on OK. So you discover that now our timeline, the duration of our timeline is 15 seconds. It starts from 0 right up to 15. Let me just zoom in a bit. You can zoom into the timeline by holding Control and using the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. So you can see that now very clearly. It starts from 0 and it moves all the way to 15. You can click and drag on our playhead here to move fast across the timeline. And we could also use our space bar or the hand tool to move across the timeline. Let's get started. So we will get to this point at 0 seconds here. I'm just going to hold Control and roll my mouse wheel in to zoom more. Remember that our composition was 29 frames per second, but I'm going to keep it at 30 frames per second. The frames per second is simply the amount of pictures that will be displayed within 1 second of video. So we will start by setting keyframes. So the first keyframes we want to set is the position keyframe. So we come to transform. We will see anchor point, position, rotation, scale, and so on. So we click on this stopwatch here, side position, and we set our position keyframe. Then we move 10 frames to the right. We can hold Control and press our right arrow key to move a single frame. And then we can move 10 times. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we set another keyframe. But the quickest way to move 10 keyframes is to hold down the Control and the Shift key on the keyboard and press the right arrow key. It moves 10 keyframes. And we will set another keyframe there. That means we have set. So after setting our keyframes, we are going to start our animation. So we come back to the first keyframe. This is the first keyframe here. Maybe if you are not exactly on the first keyframe, maybe your playhead is somewhere here. You can just come back to position properties and you click on this, go to previous keyframe arrow here beside the position, which will take you to the previous keyframe. So we will move this our shape out of the composition. So we drag on this values here and we move it out of our composition. Then we are going to play it. We press space bar to play. So when we press play, you discover that the rectangle moves into the composition monitor and stops at this point here. And then we can move 10 frames to the right, which is to this keyframe here. At this keyframe here, we are going to move this rectangle out of our composition monitor. So we get back to this position property here and we move the rectangle by dragging those, clicking and holding and dragging those values out of the monitor, like that. Then now we drag our playhead back to the start and we click on play. You discover that the rectangle moves in from the left and goes out on the right. But what we actually want is we want the rectangle to stand at the center of the screen. So what we are going to do is, where the rectangle moves in and is at the center, at this keyframe here, we are going to move 10 keyframes to the right from there. And move another 10 keyframes to the right. And then we select this keyframe here and drag it to this point here, so that we insert another keyframe here at 10 keyframes away from this one. So we will insert our keyframe there. And now when you play, nothing changes, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to copy this keyframe here. And this keyframe here represents this position here. So we will copy this keyframe here and we will paste it here. We will just select this keyframe and press Ctrl V. So after pasting our keyframe, we drag this playhead to the start again and we press on the space bar for play. You discover that at this point here, our rectangle does not just stop at the center. It's actually moving. It is shaking. So what we are going to do is we will select these two keyframes. We hold down the shift key on the keyboard and we select both keyframes, and then we right click on any one of the two keyframes and then we go to keyframe interpolation. Under this spatial interpolation option where continuous bezier is selected, we choose linear and then we select OK. So when we drag our playhead back to the start of the animation and we click on the space bar for play, we discover that the shape actually stands at the center of the screen without shaking before it exits. So now we are going to, that is our position keyframe. Now we will animate the scale keyframe. So what we want the object to do is when it stands here at the center of the screen, we want it to scale up or we want it to get bigger. Under this transform properties, there's position. Under the position, we have scale. So I'm going to click on this stopwatch icon here beside scale, and I'm going to move 10 keyframes to the right and set another scale keyframe by clicking on this add keyframe here. Then this position, at this position here, the scale is 66. So at this position here, I want our scale to move from 66 to 70. So I'm going to hold down Control Shift and the right arrow key on my keyboard to move 10 frames to the right, and I'm going to just come to this value here and type 70. 70. And if we drag this playhead backward, we can see that the shape actually increases in size from here to here. And then it moves out. But what we want our object here to do is we want it to scale up and scale down before moving out. So I'm just going to go to the last keyframe on this position properties here, and I'm going to move again 10 keyframes to the right. And I'm going to drag this end keyframe here to this point here, and I'll move 10 keyframes to the left by holding Control Shift and left arrow key, and I'm going to drag this keyframe here to this point here, so that the animation will look like this. So on our scale property here, I'm going to move 5 keyframes to the right. From this starting keyframe here, I will hold Control and press the right arrow key 5 times. So I'm holding down Control, so I'll move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I move this our keyframe to this point here. We are going to move 5 frames to the right, and then we copy this keyframe here, and then we paste at this point here. That's Control C, Control V, so that the animation will look like this. So the object gets into the composition monitor, it scales up, it is constant to this point. Then we want to scale down before moving out. So what we will do is we will go 5 keyframes again to the right. And then we copy this keyframe here and we paste it there, so that the animation looks like this. We want our object to start moving out of the screen when it finishes scaling down. We don't want it to scale down completely at this point here. Then it stands again for 5 more frames before moving out. So we can do that by selecting all of these scale keyframes here, holding down the Alt key on our keyboard and dragging to this point here. And then we are going to click play again. And that is our animation. At this point, we are going to look at the rotation properties. We are going to click on this stopwatch icon here to keyframe our rotation. Then we move 10 frames to the right and add another rotation keyframe. What we want is we want our object to be slightly slanted when it's coming in. And then when it gets into the center here, it should be straight. So what we do is we come to this first rotation keyframe here, and we rotate it by clicking on this value here and dragging. So that when we click play, it moves into the screen, and when it gets to this point here, it straightens up, scales up, remains constant, scales down, and move out. We want it to be slightly slanted when moving out too, so we are just going to copy this rotation keyframe here, Control C, Control V, and we copy this other rotation keyframe here, Control C. We move 10 keyframes to the right and Control V. And now the animation looks like this. So our object moves in with a positive rotation, like this, scales up, scales down, then moves out with a positive rotation. But it will look better if it actually moved out with a negative rotation. That means the opposite of this rotation at which it moves out. So this is positive 26 here on this rotation property here. So we just click on it and we add a minus in front of 26. And click on OK. And then now we play our animation. And then now we are going to animate our opacity. We want the object to get into the composition monitor with a 0% opacity. Then the opacity increases to the point where it has to stand still here and then remain constant to this point here where the object prepares to move out. And as the object moves out, we want the opacity to decrease back to 0, or the transparency of our object to decrease back to 0. On this stopwatch icon here beside the opacity, we click on it. We go 10 frames ahead. We set another opacity keyframe there. Then we go back to the first opacity keyframe and we reduce the opacity or the transparency to 0. So that as the object moves in, the opacity increases from 0 to 100. And at this point here where the object stands still and scales up and down, the opacity should be at 100. And at this point where the object prepares to leave the screen, the opacity should start decreasing from 100 to 0. So what we are going to do is we are going to drag our playhead to this point here, create a keyframe for opacity. The opacity there was 100 already, and then we drag our playhead to this point here and we set our opacity to 0. We can just click on it and type 0. And now we should play the animation again. So we can see that the object comes in with a 0% opacity and is slightly rotated. It stops here, it scales up, remains constant, scales down, moves out of the screen with a decreasing opacity and increasing rotation until it steps out of the composition monitor. So now we are going to learn masking. After masking, we will be learning how to trace paths from nodes. What is masking? Masking is simply a way of hiding parts of an image or a layer without erasing it. We're going to draw a shape. Let's use an ellipse. And we are going to hold down the shift key on the keyboard to make it a perfect circle. And we are going to use align on the miscellaneous panel here to align the circle to the center. We are going to import an image from our computer. You can use any image, so I'm just going to use this image. It's from a project I did some time ago. So I'll just drag the image and drop on our timeline. So what I want to do is I will scale the image down by selecting the image on our timeline, this layer panel on our timeline here, and then I will just scale the image down like that. So there are several types of masking in After Effects, but today we will be looking at the most used method of masking. If I want to make this image to be visible all in this circle, but I will select this image layer, and then I will select our ellipse tool up here, and then I will draw the ellipse on the part where I want the image to be visible. So I'm just going to hold shift and I will draw an ellipse. You see that as I draw the ellipse, just the part of the image I draw over is visible. And that is one way to mask in After Effects, and this is the most used way of masking. Yeah, I could also animate the masks. Let's just do a quick example here. Under masks, I will go to mask part, and this is a keyframe here, so I can keyframe it. I'll just click on this top one watch icon here. I go forward 10 frames, and I move this mask upward like this. I click on it and I move it upward manually. And then I'm going to press play. So we have actually hidden portions of the image without erasing the image. So if we were to delete our marks, we will still see our full image. So that is how masking is done in After Effects. Well, that is one way of masking. There are several other methods we use for masking in After Effects, which we will cover in subsequent tutorials. To conclude our tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to create nulls from paths. Creating nulls from paths simply means that we will be animating an object along a particular path. For example, if we want our object to move from this point, through this point, through this point, to this point. I know this is not a perfect curve, but we can always arrange it later. So I'm just going to hold and drag like this. I will hold my Alt key to move just individual arrows to give it a, yes, I think that will do. Let's create another object. Let's create something like a rectangle, and we can set the stroke color to blue a little more. I was trying to remove that little bomb. So there's our path, and I want this rectangle to move from this point all the way to this point. Let me just increase the path right up to the center. So I'm going to select my pen tool, and then I'll click on this point here, and then I'll just click on somewhere around the center like that. And I can hold my Alt and tweak again. And I think that will do. So I want this rectangle to move along our path from this point here to the center, which is this point here. So I will click on our rectangle. I'm just going to rename this rectangle. To rename, I select the layer and I press the Enter key on the keyboard. And then I will rename this one path. Then this one, I'm going to delete this one. So I'm going to set our anchor point to the center of our rectangle, which I will do by holding Ctrl and double clicking on the pan behind tool. I will select our path and I will give it no stroke, so that it is just an outline. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use an After Effects inbuilt script called create null from paths. I'm just going to go to Windows. I'm going to go to Windows on the menu bar, and when I'm going to click on create nulls from paths. As I said, it is a built-in After Effects script. So after creating it, I am going to expand this path layer. The content property here I'm going to expand, then I will expand the shape property too. I will also expand the path properties. After expanding the path properties, I'm going to click on trace path. So after expanding the path properties, I'm going to select path. Then I'm going to click on trace path. After tracing the path, you can see that a null object has been formed. A null object in After Effects is just an empty object. So I'm just going to move my playhead like this, and you can see that the null object is moving from this point here right to the center. So what we are going to do is we are going to take this our rectangle here and place at this point here, just before the null object starts moving, and we are going to parent the rectangle to the null object. So this is the null object here, the trace part is the null object, so we will just parent our rectangle to the null object, so that when we click on play, you see that the rectangle moves along that path. But it is a loop animation. A loop animation is simply an animation that goes on forever, never ends. So we want to stop the loop. We just want the rectangle to move into the center of our composition monitor. So I'm going to close this create nulls from paths. I'm just going to close that. We don't need that anymore. So to do that, I will select our null object. This is the null object here, which is the trace path 1. And I'm going to press U to reveal all the keyframes. So we can see the path progress keyframes right here. So I'm just going to hold the Alt key and click on this stopwatch right here, and that will break the loop. So if I play now, you discover that our object moves from this point here and it stops at this ending keyframe here. So that is how we create nulls from paths in After Effects. And I think that concludes this our introduction course. So we will be doing an exercise where we cover all of what we have looked at. So we are going to do this mini project. The files for this project, you can use any images of your choosing and any logo of your choosing, but I will also be sharing a link where you can get the exact files I'm using. So to get started, our composition is already created. We can come here, composition settings. It is a composition we want, but we could change maybe these presets. We could take maybe HDV 1080. I usually like using 30 frames per second, so I think you could use 29.97. That is usually the standard, but I usually just like using 30. The duration can be about 20 seconds. And we click on OK, and the color, we should use a black color. And we click on OK. I'm going to import the images I'm going to be using. So I'll import the images by double clicking on the project panel. Then I'll go to where I stored my images. In my case, they're under project files desktop. So I'm going to select all of these images. These images are from a project I did a while ago. Then I'll click on import. Then I can create a folder for these images. I can either create a folder for these images by dragging the images and dropping them on this folder icon here, or I could click on the create a new folder icon and a new folder will be created. So I'm just going to delete this one. And then I'll rename this one by pressing enter on my keyboard, and I'll call this one images. Then now I'm going to import the logo because we're going to be doing a logo animation in this exercise. The logo will be an AI file. The reason why I chose an AI file was because I wanted to show you that that almost every file format could be imported into After Effects. So I will just double click there, or another method, I can just shift my After Effects window to the right and I go to my files. This is the file I want to import, so I'll just drag and drop in there. And then I'll be asked to do if I want to import it as a composition or a footage. In this case, I want to import it as a composition. And the file dimensions, do I want to maintain the layer size from After Effects, or do I want it to take the dimension of the document? I will take layer size, then I click on OK. So now, this is my After Effects file here with the various layers. This is the top slide, the middle, the bottom, the green dot, and this is the background layer which I'm going to delete. And these are the layers of my logo right here. So these are the layers. We have the bottom slide, the green dot, and so on. So we can just go back to Com1 here. Well, I forgot to name our composition, so I'm going to name this composition practice exercise. So we have renamed our composition. So right now what I'm going to do is I will first bring the images. So I will click on our image folder here, click on this arrow, and I bring the images. This is the first image, the second, the third, and so on. So the first image I'm going to bring will be the simplified D. So I drag and drop on our timeline. and then I can scale it up to fill our composition size. So I'm going to scale it up like that. I'll scale it down a bit. Yeah, I'm going to scale it up like that. And that is our first image. So the next thing I'm going to do is, since I'm trying to make something like an image slideshow, so this will be the first image in the slideshow. I'm just going to zoom in a bit so that we can see each second. So I want each image to last for 2 seconds. I will come at the 2 seconds mark here. Then I'm going to crop our layer to display only for 2 seconds on the composition monitor. So there are several ways I can crop our layer. The first method we can use is hold the Alt key on the keyboard and click on the left square bracket. So you discover that we drag our playhead to the 0 seconds mark and we click on play. The image is displayed just for 2 seconds. What we are going to do now is we are going to add another image. So I will the next image we will be adding will be this file type 3. So I'm going to drag our image. If I place it under the simplified refresh slide, you discover that you don't see it. Simplified refresh size. I want to move it above. Now this is the image here. So now I want to move it this way. So I can just click on it and move it to the left like that, so that it covers the entire image below. I'm just going to scale it up a bit. I'll press S and I will just scale it up a bit like that. I want this image to display from 2 seconds to 4 seconds. So I will click on this layer here. I will hold my Alt. I click on the left square bracket. It trims from the 2 seconds mark. So when I drag my playhead back to 0 and I hit play, the first image displays and then the second image displays. And I want the second image to display for 2 seconds, so it will display from 2 to 4 seconds. I hold my Alt key again and I click my right square bracket to break this layer. I want this portion of this image, unlock your creative superpower, to disappear, while this other portion where we have simplified refresh, I want it to be retained throughout our animation. So what I'm going to do is I am going to max the unlock your creative superpower out of this image at 2 seconds. I want the unlock your creative superpower to display for 2 seconds, and after 2 seconds it disappears out of the image, allowing only this simplified refresh and all of these other things we have this way. So how I will do that is I'm going to duplicate our simplified refresh layer. To duplicate a layer in After Effects, we press Ctrl and D to duplicate a layer. So our layer has been duplicated. Duplicating means that we create an exact replica of the layer we are duplicating. So this is the second replica of this layer. So I will shift it to this point here. I'm just going to click on this eye here to make this file type 3 layer invisible. So I will just click on this eye here and it becomes invisible. So what I want to do now is I want to max this unlock your creative superpower to stop being visible. And I just want this other portion of it on the right to be visible. So what I will do is I will select the simplified refresh slide. With it selected, I will take my rectangle shape or my rectangle tool and I will zoom out. I'm going to zoom out a bit so that I can see my workspace, and I will draw a rectangle over this unlock your creativity and I will end it here. Now we can see that instead of the right side of the layer being visible, just the part within the rectangle is visible. So what we are going to do is we are going to invert the mask. To invert the mask, we will simply open the layer, we will expand the layer here, come to mask, and at this point here where we have invert, we will invert. So you see that we have had our results now. So we are going to drag our playhead to 0 and we will play again. You see that it changes at this point. So now we want to turn on the visibility of this layer up so that we drag our playhead again. We play.
it changes like that. We will do that for all our photos. Oh, and one more thing, when we just drag our layer, it does not snap to the previous layer, so we can do that by holding the shift key and dragging. You discover that it snaps to the previous layer, making sure that there's no space between the layers, so that when we play like this, it just transitions without any space. If we were to keep it like this and we play, there's some dark space before the transition, so we always hold our shift and we drag to snap the layer to the previous one. I'm going to expand this simplified layer to cover the entire animation, so I'll just drag like this up to the 20 seconds mark, so that when I bring in any layer, it displays at the side of it. So this one I'm just going to drag and I place it at the side here. Then I scale it up a bit. And then I can also hold shift and move and hold and drag my image to make sure it moves in a straight line. I will just scale that up a bit. I forgot to do that. I think that looks decent. Okay. So now what we are going to do is we are going to add some transitions to this animation because it looks too blank. So to add transitions, we will go to our miscellaneous tab and we will go to the effects and the effects and presets, and then we will. There are so many effects and presets in After Effects. It is called After Effects, which means that they have to be a lot of effects and presets. We have animation presets. We have 3D channels, audio effects, blur and sharpen, and so on. I'm going to extend my timeline by bringing over this empty space here and just dragging up so that I extend my timeline so that I see what I'm doing. Then I can zoom out a bit to reduce my composition monitor. So we go to our effects and presets, and what we will be using will be the animation presets and then the transition. The transitions we will be using will be the wipe transition. To add the transition, we are just going to select the layer we want to put the transition preset. These ones are presets, so let's look at this band wipe. We will just drag the transition and drop on the layer. The transition will fall on the layer where the playhead is. So I'm just going to put that so that, and then I'm going to play. And that is the band wipe effect. I don't like that effect, so I'm just going to go in for another transition. Let's look at iris round. And I'm going to add another iris round to this other layer. I place my playhead where I want the transition to start from. So and then I just drag and I add. So that when I come back here and I play, the layers have this iris round effect. Then for this layer, I can put an iris square effect. And I play. I'll put an iris star effect there. And for this, I will put an iris sunburst. So I go back to the start, I play. Well, for this one, I will change the iris effect. I can delete the effect there by clicking on the layer, go to Effect Controls on the project panel, and I select the layer and I press delete on my keyboard. So I have deleted the iris and I delete the effect I want to delete. So for this, I'm going to use a linear wipe instead of an iris round. Then I play. But it is not the most beautiful animation, but you get the point. And that is how you add transitions to layers in After Effects. But we are not going to be using transitions for these layers. What we are going to be doing for these layers is we will be using keyframes to animate these layers. I just wanted to show you that so that I don't forget. There are several other transitions here. We have dissolve transitions and so on and so forth, simulations, generate, and a lot of effects that come with After Effects. So we are just going to delete all of these transitions we have used here. Okay, let's play our composition again. So when I said we were going to use keyframes to animate this, we are going to animate the position of each of this. We select the spy type 3 layer, we click on P, and then we input our position keyframe. So I'm going to put a position keyframe here. I'm going to go 10 keyframes and I will add another position keyframe. I come back to my previous position keyframe and I move the position horizontally like this. If you have this kind of error, you just press the caps lock on your keyboard.
And then we press our spacebar to play. So the flyer moves in from the left. So what I want now is for the flyer to move out of our composition monitor. So I'm going to come to this endpoint here, the end of our layer, right here. And I'm going to go 10 frames to the left. I'll just hold down Ctrl plus Shift plus left arrow key. And then I'll add a position keyframe. Then I move 10 frames to the right, Ctrl plus Shift plus right arrow key. And I make another keyframe there. Then I'm going to move the flyer out of the right side of the composition monitor. So I'm just going to click and drag like that. So that when I click on play, it moves in instance, then moves out. One thing we could do to make this animation more smooth is we add an easy ease to the keyframes. So I'm going to select all of my keyframes and I'm going to use my shortcut F9 for easy ease. So that when we play, we discover that the animation looks a little more smooth. I could make the animation look better by adding a motion blur to the layer. A motion blur is simply the effect you see when you are running on high speed or you are driving a car. You don't see things the way they are, you see them with a certain blur to them. So to enable a motion blur for this layer, I'm just going to come to this layer panel here, at the top of it right here, where there's motion blur. So I will just come down again and tick this box to enable motion blur for this layer. So I'm going to click play again so that you can see the difference. You see that it has that effect when you're in a fast car or you're running on high speed. So since this is the motion I want for all my flyer layers, I'm just going to select all of these keyframes. I'll copy them with Ctrl C and I go to each of my layers. I set the playhead where I want to paste them and I click Ctrl V.
so that when I click play, the layers have the same movement. I'm just going to do the same for all the other layers. I'm just placing my playhead where I want to paste the keyframes, and I'm using shortcut Control V to paste the keyframe. Control V. And then I'm going to enable motion blur for all the layers. I'll just enable motion blur. Then I'm going to drag my playhead to the start, and I'm going to play. The animation looks decent, but one thing I could do is I could shift these layers. I could shift this layer up here a bit, like this, so that when this bottom layer prepares to go out, the top layer is preparing to come in. I'm just going to shift it like this. Let's play that again. Yes, like that. I'll do the same for all the other layers. What I can do is I can just come to this keyframe here. I move 5 keyframes to the right. Control right arrow key 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And I bring our layer. And I bring our top layer to this point here. I'll do the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Arrow keys. And the same here. So the animation looks something like this when I play. I think it looks decent. Then I'm going to increase the duration of this our simplified refresh layer to 20 seconds. Then I'm going to come to this keyframe on the yellow post layer, and I'm going to go to the simplified layer and keyframe the position. About the position keyframe, then I move 10 keyframes to the right. At another position keyframe, then I move this layer out of our composition monitor. I select all the keyframes and I use F9 for easy. Then I play our animation again. Okay, I think it looks good. So instead of waiting 5 keyframes between layers, like what I did here, I came to this keyframe here, and I moved 5 frames. Before I brought in this layer, what I'm going to do is, it looks like that duration is too long, so I'm going to move 3 keyframes forward. 1, 2, 3, and I bring our top layer to this point. I'll do the same for all the other layers. I'll come to this keyframe here, I'll just move these keyframes to the left. And our animation already looks better. So now we are going to pre-compose our layers. Pre-composing simply means grouping our layers into one group so that we can work on all our layers as a single layer. So I'm just going to select all of them, and I right click on any one of them. I click pre-compose. Then I'm going to call this keyframe animation. Then the animation finishes here around 11 seconds. So I'm just going to trim our keyframes here by pressing R plus right square bracket. Then now, to animate our logo, I'm going to bring in our logo composition. This is our logo here. Where this logo, I'll just bring in here. Then I will move it while holding my shift to snap it to this a keyframe animation layer here. So after opening our logo layer, I'm going to animate the logo. So what I want is I want this top slide to move in from the top, the bottom slide moves in from the bottom, the middle slide scales up while rotating into position, and this dot here moves across a path into its position. So to get started, I'm going to go to the top slide. I'll press P on the keyboard for my position keyframe. I'll move 10 keyframes to the right, set another position keyframe there. Go back to the previous keyframe and move this like that. And then I'll select both keyframes and use F9 for easy, so that when I play, it looks like that. Good. So I'm going to do the same for the bottom slide. So I just select my layer, I press P on my keyboard, which is shortcut for position. You could always access position by clicking on this drop down arrow here and selecting position from here. But it's really more practical to just use a shortcut. Then I go 10 keyframes. I create another position keyframe I come behind. I move this all the way to the bottom. I select both keyframes, I right click, keyframe assistance, easy. Good. And so this middle slide, I want the slide to scale up while spinning into position. So what I'm going to do is I'll press S for the scale keyframe. I set a keyframe there, go 10 keyframes ahead. I set another scale keyframe, go back behind, and I scale it down all the way to 0. Then you see that the 10 keyframe scales up all the way to 100. I select all of these keyframes, I right click, keyframe assistance, easy. Then now I'm going to add a rotation keyframe to the middle slide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold shift and press R for rotation. Then I will keyframe the rotation. Now go 10 frames forward, and I will add another rotation keyframe there. Then I will set the rotation of 360 degrees, which is equals to 1 revolution. That is why you have a 1 there. Then right click on it, keyframe assistance, easy. Okay. So we have covered the position, the rotation, and the scale keyframes. To finalize this lesson, we are going to create a motion path. We will be using our pen tool, and then we create a path in which this dot will move into the screen. So it will come in from here, it moves like this, it spins like this, like this, like this, and it ends there. I'm just going to arrange my curves to look a little more refined. So I'll just I'm holding the Alt key to move individual arrows. And when I want to move 2 arrows at the same time, I don't hold the Alt key. So I think that is a decent looking curve. it has no outline and no fill. So what we are going to do with our curve selected, we click on this drop down arrow here. We go to we go to content, we go to shape, and we select parts. We click on the drop down arrow under parts, and we select the part where we can keyframe. And then now we go to the windows, we scroll down, we go to create nulls from parts, and we click on trace parts. Tracing parts will generate a null object. This is the null object here. We can just rename the null object dot parts. And you can see the null object coming in and moving like that. And it is a loop, it moves in a loop. So what we can do here is we click on the null object, which is the dot part. We press U on the keyboard to expose all of the keyframes, and we hold Alt on our keyboard and we press this stopwatch button right here while holding Alt to break the loop, so that it only moves for the duration of the keyframes. Like that. So at this point here, we will select our dot, our green dot. We should just move it to the top of our layer, and we parent to this dot part, and then we play. At least it looks very brilliant for your first animation. So that is a basic logo animation in After Effects. So now to combine this logo animation with our image animation, how are we going to do that? We can take these keyframes under this trace part and we make an easy ease. This easy ease is just for smooth, more dramatic movement. Go to keyframe assistance, easy ease. I think we should extend these keyframes a bit. We can, with both keyframes selected, we can hold shift and drag it up to the 2 seconds mark. Okay, and I think that looks decent. So now we can go back to our practice exercise, and then we play from the start. And this animation ends around this point here. So we should just keep it at 15 seconds. We trim our layer. Alt plus right square bracket on the keyboard. And that is our little 13-second animation. About 30 seconds, we can scale our logo. So I will add a scale keyframe. I'll go 10 frames, add another scale keyframe. We scale it to about 110. Go 5 keyframes, Control plus right arrow key, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Scale it to 95. Go 5 more keyframes, Control right arrow key 5 times. Set it to 105. And go 5 keyframes, Control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right arrow key, and set it to 100. So that when we play our animation, it looks something like this. It looks like there's some form of popping. Then we select all our keyframes, right click, keyframe assistance, easy.
So ladies and gentlemen, we are going to conclude by adding a free soundtrack to our project, and then we will dive straight into exporting. So to add a free soundtrack, what we are just going to do is we are going to import the soundtrack into our project panel. So I'll just double click on the project panel. I will pick my soundtrack from my project folder on my desktop. The soundtrack I'm using is no copyright background music, sound I picked from YouTube, and I'm going to click on import. Now just drag the sound and drop on our timeline. After dropping on our timeline, the audio is too high. I'm just going to reduce the volume. I'll press this drop down arrow right here. I'll also click on this drop down arrow beside the audio properties. This will give me the audio level, which I'm just going to, I'll not keyframe the audio level, I'll just reduce the audio level for the entire soundtrack. So I'm just going to keep it at minus 15 decibels. And I'm going to click on play again. Yeah, I think that is good enough. And then I'm going to open the waveform here so that I see exactly where the audio starts. I'll bring my playhead to the point where it starts here, and then I will trim my audio layer. I'll just hold Alt key on the keyboard and left square bracket to trim. Then I drag my audio layer to the start of my timeline, and then I press play. And then at the end of our animation here, also cut my audio. I trim it there, Alt plus right square brackets. Then I press N on the keyboard. This is a shortcut for endpoint in After Effects. The endpoint is simply the point where the footage stops playing on the timeline and the playhead starts again from the beginning. So let's just play again. And now you can see that with the endpoint set, the playhead does not play the entire timeline. Then we can also set a start point. Let's say we want our start point to be here. We set the start point by pressing B on the keyboard. This is like begin, B. I don't know why the shortcut for the endpoint is an N, but it works. So you discover that we can preview only what is between the start and the end point. So now I'm just going to set our start point back to 0. I'll just drag the playhead to 0 and I'll click on B for start point. It should be noted that when we are exporting, we can only export what is within our start point and our end point. So now to export, to turn this into a real video that you can view on your mobile phones, tablets, and so on, we are going to go to our composition menu here on the menu bar. And we click on Add to Render Queue. So after clicking on that, here we will choose our exportation setting. And these are our render settings right here. So in these settings, we are going to choose. So these render settings here, we have best settings. We are just going to click on it. Here we will select the quality. Do we want a draft quality, a wireframe quality? But just click on best. We will get to the other qualities in subsequent tutorials. The resolution, we want it to be full. The disk catch, read only, leave it on read only. The motion blur on check layers. And then the time span, work area only. And we click on use compositions frame rate, which is 30 frames per second, which we set at the start of our composition. Then we click on OK. Then for this output module, it is our output quality. The quality of our video. The format, we should leave it on QuickTime. The post-render action, we should leave it on none. We will get to all the others in subsequent tutorials. The channel, leave it on RGB, and so on and so forth. and click on OK after we are done with that. And now we are going to set the location and where we will save our file after exportation. On this output here, we click on practice exercise, which is the name of our exercise file, and I will just leave it on my desktop. So I will select desktop, and then I click save, and then I click on render here. And that is it, rendering. There are better ways to render with Adobe Media Encoder, and we will get to that in subsequent tutorials. So we are finished rendering our project, so we can just go back to our desktop and we play it. And that is our project. And now that is our project fully rendered as a video. You could distribute to your friends, family, post on social media, and so on. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching to the end of this tutorial. Don't forget to like our video and subscribe to our channel, and see you in our subsequent tutorial.